I open the October 24th, 2022 study session. And we have all members in attendance except for Charla, Councilmember Newman.
Mayor, she is here. We're just getting her upgraded now.
Okay, we have all council members in attendance. 6 o'clock. All right, and I will move right on down to the number 1, 2024 Sumner Comprehensive Plan Update Cycle Opening. Except for I think Jason wanted to talk about the sound.
Yeah, no problem. Just a bit of housekeeping. I caught most of you, but just as a reminder, we're going to try something a little different with the mics tonight. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand when the mayor asks. She'll acknowledge you. Then turn on your mic. And then when you're done speaking, go ahead and turn your mic off. So it won't go green. It'll only go red tonight for you. So unless there's questions, we'll go ahead and get started with the 2024 Comp Plan Update Cycle Opening. We'll turn it over to Senior Planner Ann Siegenthaler.
Great. Good evening, Mayor Hayden and City Council members. Can you all hear me okay? See some nods. Okay. Okay, great. Tonight, staff is asking the City Council to approve our 2024 Comprehensive Plan Amendment Cycle. And we're asking the council to, the term is to open the cycle to begin that process of updating the comprehensive plan. And this is fairly routine. We go through this amendment cycle perhaps every 1 or 2 years. And so we're in that annual amendment cycle. And then in this year, in addition to the annual amendments, we are also undertaking what's called a 10-year periodic update, something that's required by the state for us to do every 10 years. And so that's going to be a little more extensive. Our 10-year update entails some fairly extensive revisions to the comprehensive plan and our regulations to reflect the changes that have occurred, new laws, new changes in land use in the community over the last decade. And we don't know the full scope of the update yet, not until we go out for public notice and allow the public an opportunity to submit proposals for consideration. And in the past, I'll just mention the types of public proposals we get are typically map changes, i.e. rezones. And we don't know if we will have any such proposals, but your action tonight will open up that process for the public if they're interested in submitting something. Quick word on just the process and the timeline. Once the council agrees to open the amendment cycle, then staff will go ahead and go through a public noticing process, and that will start in January of 2023. And so we'll get the word out in a number of ways, newspaper notices, through our city website and our city emails and our e-news. And we'll try to get pretty good coverage to let people know that they could take advantage of this open cycle if they have either map changes to propose or a text amendment, a zoning regulation that they would like to see amended. Once the deadline is completed for the open cycle and submittals, then we go to the Planning Commission, who will review the range of proposals, and they will determine whether or not those proposals are eligible for consideration for this amendment cycle. And then later on, the Planning Commission will start a series of meetings where they evaluate the merits of each of those proposals. And then eventually, after the Planning Commission goes through that evaluation in a public hearing process, the proposals will come to the City Council for that public hearing and council review process. And it's as you can imagine, it's a pretty extensive review and a long timeline. We are required to be completed with the update by end of December 2024. And so start that work in January 23, go through the Planning Commission most of 2023, and then come back to the City Council probably around the beginning of 2024. So again, the request tonight is staff is just asking that the council confirm that we may start the 2024 comprehensive plan update and begin this public notice process that's required. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Any questions? No. Any questions of council members online? I see no questions. Are we acknowledging that tonight, that to start, or do we wait till the council meeting?
No, you'd actually,
That is,
go ahead.
oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Go ahead.
that is correct. And the confirmation process is pretty informal. It's really just an ayes and nays or head nods, just to confirm. What we're looking for is if there's any major objection to us beginning this process or any major issues that you would like to discuss. But it's pretty much just a head nod. And we typically in the past have done it at study sessions.
All right, head nods. Yes, yes. Yes. Kurt, yes. Charla? Pat? We're all good. We've got them all.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Right. Okay, moving on, 2023, 2024 departmental budget reviews.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the final budget presentation where we're going to be diving into each department. We'll have some general discussion about unfunded items later to wrap up tonight, and then we'll be continuing that discussion at a future study session. Bit of housekeeping, we are going slightly out of order compared to what is in your packet. We are going to be starting tonight on page 21 of your packet, which is the tourism tax fund. So I'll have Communications Director Palmer come up, and as soon as we get the presentation going, she will start.
Okay. All right, good evening, Council. It's a pleasure to be before you. This portion is a little more straightforward than some of the other presentations I've been hearing, so I will hopefully won't take up too much of your time. As you probably remember from seeing me in previous meetings, Sumner's lodging tax is a bit different from other cities. 7% is collected at our hotels. 2% of that comes to the city of Sumner as the shared occupancy tax, and 5% of that goes to Pierce County. So just a reminder, what you have before you is just that 2%. Pierce County runs their own process to share that money with Sumner and other organizations. And actually, we have been recommended for funding through them. So it's always a partnership to put together all the different funding sources to move ahead tourism. A lot of people talk about the tourism effort as putting heads in beds. I just like to take this opportunity to remind you, we are not the marketing arm of the hotel industry. The reason it's important for a city like ours to put heads in beds is that's the #1 way to increase spending in your community by visitors. I haven't looked at a recent metric, but it's a high percentage change if they spend the night versus do a day trip, because then they're eating more, probably forgetting something and running and get to Fred Meyer to get it, shopping in our stores. So that is really the reason it's economic development for all of our businesses, not just the hotels. A little bit of an update on where we are as we're coming out of the pandemic. During the pandemic, the Candlewood Suites opened on our interchange. We also saw a very high occupancy rate in our hotels. It was very interesting. They weren't entirely sure why. We're not sure how long it's going to last, but it's nice to have it while we have it. Something else also happening in the region is Pierce County's lodging tax chose to hire a company. They did an RFP, and they chose a company called MMGY Next Factor. What they want is a regional strategic tourism plan. They want to make sure that year after year, they're continuing to push in the same direction so that there's, a very focused and strategic effort to every tourism dollar spent. Coincidentally, we had been talking about doing a multi-year strategic tourism plan. For those of you who might recall, we did a DIY version of this when I first arrived about 15 years ago. We did not have money to hire an outside company, so we used data we already had. We did an effort to, really walk through that process that we saw other companies doing to see what experience we had, what experience we wanted to offer, and if there was any gap to close. We also brought in outside marketers who primarily worked in Seattle, who had never been to Sumner before, to be our outside perspective and test that. It was from that we had the, we are an authentic small town, the hook of the rhubarb pie capital. And that has worked really well for us. We have been written up across the nation, including in New York, about how this is the way to market a city. This is how you do it right. It's been very flattering. It's also been 15 years. So it seems like it's time to maybe do a check-in. And now we do have hotels feeding into our lodging tax. We do have some funding there to have an outsider check in with us. So this really was a good opportunity. I worked with Pierce County and MMGY Next Factor. They will do what's called, I checked the term with Andrea, it's called a piggyback, where we use the same company so that we achieve some cost savings there. And we also have that synergy because they're already checking what the whole county should be promoting. And so Sumner can then be lined up to align with the countywide strategy to make sure, for that maximum benefit. So this went to your Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. They voted unanimously to approve $75,000, which is included in this budget for this piggyback contract with Next Factor to do a strategic marketing sub-plan for Sumner that aligns with the regional county plan. Just a little bit more on this. This is their 23 recommendation. We will, with the mid-biennial budget, check in on 24. You heard me say the hotels were seeing high occupancy. The committee fully realized they were not allocating all the money they could have. But they also knew we were receiving a lot of dollars from other sources to keep working on the Main Street Vision, to keep working on the Ryan House rehabilitation. They wanted us to start using some of that funding and get a little farther down the road next year to make wiser decisions on where we would maybe need Sumner dollars put best on both the Main Street Vision, Heritage Park, alley activation, and the Ryan House. So they intentionally sent you a smaller than usual funding recommendation right now, which Chair Hochstetter of the LTAC and I thought was a very wise choice, and we appreciated their care with our dollars and their recommendation.
Cindy, go ahead.
Ms. Palmer, on this plan that you're going to have done, how soon would they be evaluating this? Because what I'm thinking about is all the great improvements we have coming. I want to make sure that gets wrapped into the plan. So I was just wondering about the timeline on that.
Sure. The plan for this would be in 23. That is also when Pierce County is hiring them with their money for 23. They are an outside company. So we also wanted to get them while Pierce County is already paying for them to come fly here and stay here. I do think it will be an interesting process to work with them on the changes we're making downtown. Also just the change that Sumner will see with, things like the across the way getting developed. I don't think it will change at the core who Sumner is, but they're just physical changes to think about. So I think one of the things it will be on all of us when they work with us is talking about where Sumner is, where we're going in the future. Another difference is back when we did this 15 years ago, we had the 60-year-old tag of, rhubarb pie capital of the world, but none of the farms were really into agritourism. They just wanted to farm. And that has changed. We have a lot of the farms going into more agritourism, agritainment around us, which is a great opportunity. So all of these different changes will be exactly when we check in with them. So we might have to describe what's coming, and some of it they'll
So you'll
see.
be able to show them plans and that sort of thing, and that's on your intentions?
Yes.
Because I do think that it's going to, I think it's going to change how the town feels a lot. So I'm really wanting that to be in on your study. So thank you.
Barbara.
So is there any connection of, the hotels, the major ones are at the interchange? Is there any way people that don't have a car can get into town, or that's something that could be thought of, because you may stay, it may say Sumner on the address, but do they really ever come into town?
Correct.
What kind of encouragement are you providing?
Right. back in the day, although this still relies on a car, but back in the day, that's why we invested in wayfinding signs. That's something you approved in a previous package that's still underway and coming, but that still relies on a vehicle or a good bike. But that'll be something to bring up because that is kind of a missing piece, both to come back and visit Sumner and also if, when one of the hotels used to have a shuttle, it was a nice connection to stay here and go to the, a Seahawks game and ride the train and not worry about a car. And we kind of lost that over time.
Mhm. Well, I hope that can be encouraged.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Cindy.
Are the hotels still hooking people up with Uber and that sort of situation for all that? Because they would go to the concierge there and ask those questions. How do I get me and my kids downtown?
Right. That's a great point. And this is a nice reason you have the hoteliers sitting on your lodging tax committee. They provide their input. I have not heard that. I'll have to check in with them lately because you're right, with Uber and Lyft, that kind of offers a new dynamic we never had before. What I have heard is a big challenge is recommending something open after 5 for dining, which is starting to change.
All right. Okay.
Okay, Jeff. This is what I already went over about the heads and beds and why that was important, and the council priorities. Again, I do think tourism is one of those great industries that brings in dollars to your community by being who you are. So as we change, I do think welcoming small town charm will still be a big part of who we want to present, even with the changes. It's why we have music. It's why we have lights on the buildings. It's why we have the whole Main Street vision coming. And then also supporting business growth. I already talked about that. Also leveraging partnerships. This really is a huge partnership. Large destination marketing organizations like Travel Tacoma, Visit Rainier have been excellent partners for the city of Sumner, and we keep seeing those partnerships getting stronger and stronger, which really help us out. And then no really ongoing, you see the 75 that's coming as a recommendation for you, plus the carryovers from the things you've already approved that are underway and will continue into 23.
Right. Any other questions for
Any
Ms.
other
Palmer?
questions? Mr. Stewart?
Thank you for that presentation. I'm kind of curious, 2 things. The Open in Sumner seemed to be a very successful venture for the whole area. Has there been any, I don't even know what to say, any effort put forth to get other tournaments in some of the major golf courses around here?
Yes, actually, Travel Tacoma combined with, it's called the Sports Commission. It had been called the Tacoma Sports Commission, and they actually joined forces right before COVID hit with the with what had been the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And I can get more details from Dean Burke on what they're doing with sports, but they continue to keep pushing sporting events. They were trying to bring bigger soccer tournaments here. I know that a couple of years they have bid on our behalf. It's actually the county park, but the BMX park, to bring a BMX thing. And I went out to one of them and I'm like, does this really bring in people? And they're like, and here's so-and-so from Tokyo. And then next is so-and-so from Vancouver, BC. I'm like, holy cow. Yes, this brings in a lot of people from a lot of different places. So I can get more details from the Sports Commission arm of Travel Tacoma, but yes, they are continuing to bring more and more. And I believe there's not an open, but they continue to bring things like an amateur 4-ball, other things to Chambers Bay that continue to help us.
Excellent. A family member stayed at one of the local hotels, which happened to be during the fair, and I was shocked how much they charge. And so their rates must rise and fall with demand. Is there any way to
Absolutely.
control that at all? Or does the city
Not
ever-
really. It was interesting because we were seeing record occupancy rates, but we were not seeing the revenue. We went back and looked in revenue, except for things like fares, was actually still tracking a little bit lower last I checked than pre-pandemic rates. But it is supply and demand. One hope countywide is the more demand there is on our rooms, the more hotels we maybe see come and and keep generating this economic engine for our area.
Great, thank you.
All right. Barbara?
So tomorrow I'm gonna start a job, part-time for the Sewing Expo. And so I wonder about, like when there are events at the fair, I mean, I will promote, stay in Sumner, but do you have a way to do that? Or is there, an incentive, like come to Sumner and you get a $10 pass or downtown or something that,
Yeah, we talked about, and in fact, that was on, if you remember, that was on the schedule. I think we had some of our Sumner money and some regional money to do a Stay in Sumner campaign this year. And you never saw it, not because you already live here, but because of these occupancy rates. We got together with the hotel and we said, it doesn't make any sense to spend a ton of money to encourage people to stay in a hotel that's already full. So we let the county know that we were not going to spend the money they awarded and asked them to, please remember, we were trying to be good stewards of their money, not because it was a bad idea. So we still have that idea in our head. But if you run a great promotion and your hotel's already full, people just get frustrated because then they feel locked out. So we felt it was best to put that on hold. We also found out some things like you can't pre-buy national park entrance fees.
that's
We did
right.
not know that. We do now. So I think, it's still a great idea and we'll look at things, maybe things like the Sewing Expo and the fair, but you do have to balance with, is it already full? And I know things like that. Thank you for your work on that because that does drive room nights in Sumner.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Kurt, are you good? Good. And none online. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go back to the top of the presentation now, and I'll turn it over to Chief Financial Officer Cassandra Raymond.
Good evening, everyone. So we are on the home stretch of the budget. We have been talking for weeks on the various programs and active funds within the city. And tonight we've got some wrap up on some of the lesser known fund activity, but funds that are just as important. We're going to start with our General Reserve Fund. This is Fund 002. This is reported as part of our general fund, but it's used as a reserve fund for general fund activities. This was established, I believe, in 2006, and it is specifically called out in the code, the Sumner Municipal Code. Any use of this fund must be authorized by a 2/3 majority of the members of City Council. One of the kind of clarifications I want to be sure that I make is this fund is exclusive of the 8% general fund balance operational reserve targets that are set by our financial policies. We have that reserve set. It's 8% of our general fund balance. It's put aside. That's our target to meet for our operational reserve. We do meet that annually. We are planning on reviewing those reserve targets in 2023. The Government Financial Officers Association, the GFOA, has come out with some different best practices on really increasing what that reserve level is. So that will be kind of a separate parallel project. But when we're looking specifically at our General Reserve Fund 002, we have about $980,000 in that. We don't have any activity programmed for the 23-24 biennium. But again, if that's something that City Council wishes to access as a funding source for any unmet projects or any additional projects, that is one that would need a supermajority of council. So our goals are, of course, to maintain a strong reserve fund. But again, this is kind of a parallel fund that is separate from our operational reserve that we have set by financial policy.
Cassandra, we have a question here from somebody.
I think mine's on, isn't it?
Mine's on too.
So Cassandra, can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Okay. I just have a little problem. Do you call this by several different names? I mean, sometimes we call it the council something, or what is this really called the Strategic Reserve Fund? No.
No, that is something different. So I believe what you're referring to, and please correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but the city council strategic fund is what said it's a portion of the property tax is essentially deferred and noted for council programming. That's actually within our general fund, within the general fund 001. This is a completely separate fund that was set aside. Like I said, I believe in 2006, there were some, this was before me, so I can certainly go back and get the specifics, but I believe there was an additional inflow of permitting revenues. And the council at that time said, we're going to put this aside, essentially kind of like a rainy day fund, if we ever need to access it. And then it was set up by municipal code and set up to require a super majority to access. It is separate from the city council strategic fund.
Okay, thank you. I was always confusing those two. So
Yep.
thank you for that help on that.
Of course.
Barbara?
So will money be added into that fund after January 1st?
I think that's a really good question, Councilmember Botetto. It's like I said, we're looking at reviewing our financial policies in 2023. One of the things that the financial policy sets out is an 8% operational reserve in the general fund. It's part of the fund balance within Fund 001. And we need to really take a look at, is that a reasonable amount? Is it too low? Is it too high? Under GFOA's new best practices, that 8% is actually a little bit low. So we'll be taking a look at that. And then I think one of the questions that has to be on the table is, do we combine that operational reserve with this reserve fund, or how do we set that up to provide the greatest transparency and fiscal responsibility for council?
So Cassandra, if I could just jump in here real
Yes.
quick. Councilmember Potato's question was, are we going to add money to this fund in 23? And that answer is no, we are not
Correct.
adding to this fund. If anything, as Cassandra just mentioned, we might be coming back to council next year saying you really should consider combining this with our general fund reserves, since, as she mentioned, they're a little low
Okay,
for GFOA best practices.
all right, thank you.
Councilmember Reed?
Thank you, Mayor. Cassandra, just to clarify, so I've got it straight. So there's general fund, there's the strategic council reserve, and then there's the emergency or what people refer to as the rainy day fund. And this is a separate fund from that.
This is what people refer to as the rainy day fund.
Okay, so this is the emergency backup should there be something catastrophic.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilmember Stewart?
Thank you. Cassandra, I'm curious, you said this was established in 2006, to the best of your recollection. As a city, can you give us a quick flyby over what funds have been used for in this?
I believe the only time these funds were accessed were circa 2012, 2013 to assist with debt service for the Sumner Meadows Golf Course.
Okay, thank you.
Any more down here? Councilmember Reed? Oh, okay.
Sorry, I
Councilmember-
forgot to take my hand down.
All right, that's all right. Councilmember Cole?
Oh, okay. Can you just clarify for me, because I'm a little confused. It says it's supposed to be an 8% general fund balance. So to me, it sounds like it's required, but there's not going to be any additional funding added to it next year for the next biennium.
I apologize. It is, there are actually two separate things that we're looking at. And one of the things we'll be looking at is whether or not we need to rename this one. So this general reserve fund 002 is completely separate from the 8% operational reserve. So these were monies that were set aside by council right around 2006, kind of as a rainy day fund. In our general fund, so 001, our operational fund, Under our financial policies, we just ensure that annually we have at least 8% of our total operational cost available in fund balance. So our goal is to not dip our fund balance in Fund 001 below the point where we would have an 8% operational reserve.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
One more.
Councilmember Hawks?
How far below the 8% are we?
We are not, we are over our 8% reserve.
Okay.
While we're over the 8%, we are still below, that 8% target is below the GFOA best practice number.
Okay, that's where I'm getting at,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
that's an old number,
Correct,
and now they're recommending a higher percentage than that.
correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Brown?
How many reserve funds do we have?
This is our only formal reserve fund. Actually, I misspoke. This is our only formal reserve fund that is unallocated for any specific purpose. The next fund we'll be talking about is our building reserve fund.
Go ahead.
But isn't the council fund a reserve fund?
It is, are you referring to the city council strategic reserves?
Yes.
They are earmarked by resolution for council action, but they're not in a specific fund.
All right, I'll just get confused. Thank you.
It's accounting. So let me try to help clear the deck here. This is really a rainy day fund is what we're talking about here. And it was established in 2006, as Cassandra mentioned, from a one-time revenue stream. It's been sitting there relatively untouched since 2006. We did dip into it, as Cassandra mentioned, for some debt service at one point. But other than that, it sat there. In addition to this fund, we do set aside money on a regular basis to replace vehicles, buildings, and parks, equipment, things of that nature. The Strategic Reserve Fund was established by council, I think 4 years ago now. And it was really a way of earmarking or protecting property tax revenue so it didn't fall into general operations. So we weren't hiring staff with it. It was meant really to be used to leverage other existing funds for one-time projects, one-time capital investments, or other important things that helps the council achieve their strategic priorities. That being said, there will come a point sometime into the future where those lines cross, and operationally, you're not going to have the ability to set money aside in a council strategic reserve without cutting services somewhere else. I don't know when that is. I think you're a ways off from that right now. But like I mentioned before, the strategic reserve fund that council sets from property tax is what's allowing us to move forward with things like the town center utility project and Wooden Main intersection. Without that reserve, that strategic money, one or both of those projects would not be possible this year. So I know it's confusing. That is part of the reason why I think this fund in the future will go away, because to meet GFOA standards, we're going to need to bolster our operational savings account that we have in case of an emergency. But that needs a little bit more study, looking at our expenses as well as our fund balances. So I hope that helps. Probably added more confusion to it, but from a non-accountant finance person, I'm trying to explain it.
Councilmember Botetto.
So what is GFOA?
The Government Finance Officers Association.
Oh, okay. I thought it was,
We love our acronyms.
yeah, General Fund of America or something. Okay, thank you.
All right. Are we done on here? Yep. Nobody up there? Okay.
Okay, so a lot of the funds that we're talking about tonight have the same council priorities. These are focusing on our long-range financial stability, transparency in policy and actions, and an equitable distribution of our resources. And so the department highlights, now we are talking about our building reserve fund. And this is our second of our formal official reserve funds. These are funds that accrue from an annual transfer that's sourced from our property tax. This was put in place several years ago. And these funds are accrued to support our city facility improvements, replacement, and significant maintenance. When we talk about significant maintenance, we're really talking about those items that are integral to the facility to run. HVAC, roofing, some of the things that we're focusing on in this upcoming biennium. This fund doesn't have any project activity programmed into it. Rather, what it does is, as needed and as approved through the budget process, we transfer funds to our facilities capital fund. In the 23-24 biennium, we'll be replacing the roof at City Hall. That roof is at end of life. It's actually been at end of life for a few years. And then doing some exterior painting of the senior center. To the best what we can tell, the senior center hasn't had an exterior painting in at least the last 15 years, likely more. And we are seeing some areas where we're seeing bare wood coming through the faded paint. So we need to be sure that we are protecting that asset. Long-term goals for our building reserve is to create a stable funding source for city facilities. As our facilities age, we need to have a program in place to provide for that kind of major maintenance or replacement. Deferring maintenance just costs more in the long run. So we want to be sure that we're accruing resources to just maintain those assets. In council priorities, maintaining our welcoming small town, we want to have our assets in good repair, distribution of resources, our long-range financial stability. You know, deferring the maintenance will usually cost more in the long run. So we want to be sure that we are taking care of things as the need arises. And then transparency in our policy and actions. We found that establishing this kind of a reserve fund where we can very clearly see the inflows in from the general fund sourced from property tax and clearly see the outflows as transfers to the funds gives us a really good transparent kind of tracking of the resources. Program overview for the 23-24, it's an annual transfer from the general fund of $100,000, so $200,000 over the biennium. We will be replacing the City Hall roof. Our estimates are about $350,000. There's a fair amount of square footage up on that roof to replace, and then $40,000 for the senior center exterior painting. We have the next slide, please.
We have a question from Councilmember Cole.
Yes.
Actually, just a quick question. Actually, this came to mind before, but and you mentioned that there's a pretty good square footage amount to cover on that City Hall roof. That just seems like a lot of money to me because I know that maybe at the most in a regular house, maybe $40,000, and they typically don't even get that high for a roof replacement. Why is it? I mean, and I'm gonna say maybe it might be 4 houses worth of roof up there. I'm just guessing. I'm just sort of estimating. That just seems really steep. Does that seem steep to you?
That's a lot of money. So I think some of the things that so first of all, $350,000, that was kind of an informal estimate we had asked for and received from one of the roofing companies. For this, we will be going out to a sealed bid. So there will be that. Because it's a government work, any roofer that takes this project will be subject to prevailing wages. That does tend to increase very much from a residential job. And then we have such a variable elevation on our roof line. There's a lot of peaks, a lot of gables, and I think that increases the cost as well. I will say I am not an expert in facilities, so I would be happy to see if I can get some additional information on that from our facilities lead, or if Mr. Wilson has additional insight.
And no, that's not necessary for additional information, but I just, every time I see
Yeah.
that number, it just seems like it's so high to me. So that's it.
Agreed. I had some sticker shock too.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we get back?
I'll just add one more thing on the roof. If you've been upstairs lately, you'll see that, it's definitely leaking. So that also, whenever you tear off a roof, you always find things you got to fix. So hopefully that when we got this estimate, they know that and they were inflating it to cover those costs. But it's one of those hard things to budget because we can't go out and get a comprehensive estimate because a lot of things change. And then as Ms. Raymond said, it will be into a sealed bid situation when we do this work.
Councilmember Potato.
So before COVID, there was talk of increasing office space. Has that been diminished now that people are working remotely, and so you don't see that need anymore?
We're at the point now, if we add any staff upstairs, we will be asking staff to share workspaces. And we know that is going to be a reality. And that is why we have embraced the hybrid work environment and the ability to work from home. Some positions may eventually be 100% remote to help us facilitate space needs, because it's expensive to add space onto this building.
But right now, you're not looking at that.
Not right now. We're playing Tetris every time we need to, and we're okay right now.
Okay, well, that's good. All right, thanks.
Anybody else? Oh, okay, go ahead.
So just as I think in all of the other funds, there were a variety of asks for facilities, and some of them were pretty high ticket that we need to take a closer look at and evaluate in the future. So one of the biggest ones was City Hall window replacement. A rough estimate, again, this would be subject to prevailing wages and we would have to do bids, but just a very rough estimate from a window company was $400,000. We know that the windows at City Hall, if you ever take a close look at some of the sashings, I mean, we know we've got aging wood that has some rotting, and then the windows are old and they're end of life. And then wintertime we get a pretty good draft. So we try and avail ourselves of draft stoppers to try and mitigate that.
Councilmember Newman.
Yeah, when I was looking through this earlier, I mean, granted, 400,000 is hefty. Do we know, like, in terms of the condition and how bad they are, do we know like what the energy cost savings would be over time with improvements?
We have not been able to quantify exactly what the energy loss is. I can tell you most of the windows on the south side of the building, particularly on the older half, do not even shut. You can push them closed, but they don't actually seal. And my office, for example, if it's the least bit windy, they whistle all the time and there's a draft. And that is consistent across that whole side of the building. I guarantee you there would be an energy savings. How much, we have not been able to quantify at this time.
Okay, thank you. And sorry about that. Must be really fun.
It's a ambiance.
Just kind of like being next to the train too. Yeah. And then is there a way to do it in phases, or does that increase the cost?
I definitely think it's able to be done in phases. One of the challenges we have is the next line is the City Hall needs paint too. But to paint, we really need to get the sashes repaired. Most of them are bare wood, and as Cassandra mentioned, are starting to show signs of rot. So it's kind of chicken and the egg, right? You don't want to paint when you still have finishing work to do. So not saying it's impossible, but there's definitely needs some timing, and maybe you do half, like the back half of the building one year and the front half a different year. So you wouldn't notice the paint fade change. All possible. We also think that while there's $400,000 listed here, there's probably windows that we could forego replacing, right? And just focus on the worst windows to start with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
And so then in the final item, that was a request, were Ryan House improvements, and taking a look at that, just some additional planning to be done.
One of the reasons why this was cut by the executive department is because staff was successful at getting additional funds from Pierce County lodging tax, as well as grant approval from the state of Washington. I believe it's a historic preservation grant. So we have about $725,000 worth of outside funding that'll be coming to us from the Ryan House, provided the Pierce County Council approves their budget and the state passes their budget. So we are making significant progress on the Ryan House funding. So didn't feel it was appropriate at this point to dedicate local resources beyond what we already have.
So the next fund we look at is our REIT fund. This is in our capital fund series. It's REIT is our real estate excise tax. This is a tax typically paid by the seller on any real property transaction. It's a statewide tax. Starting, I believe, 2 years ago, it's graduated. There's a higher rate collected for higher price sales. The funds are authorized by statute. They are restricted to specific use. We've typically in the past used them to support capital projects, really using REIT funds as matches for grant applications. We've used REIT on parks and trails, trail construction, park acquisition, as well as street projects. Cannery Way Bridge, Stewart Road Bridge, the State Route 410, 166 interchange, the Wood and Main intersection have all benefited from REIT funds. Next slide, please. Our 23-24 goals are to continue to support our capital projects within the statutory guidelines. There are actually kind of two buckets of REIT funds. There's REIT 1 and REIT 2. They are tracked separately. So you'll see them separately in the budget. They each have a little bit different authorized use by state statute. And so as we get requests from the departments for REIT fund support for their capital projects, we analyze to be sure that it is subject and falls within those statutes. We also monitor the revenue inflow. This one is, it's hard to predict. It's hard to forecast because it really does fluctuate with changes in not only the housing market, but the commercial market. You know, we get REIT not only from transactions for residential home sales, but whenever a property in our manufacturing and industrial center changes ownership, REIT applies to that as well. So it makes it difficult to forecast. So we tend to be conservative in our forecasting for this fund. So we'll continue to leverage our capital projects. We use REIT revenues as seed and matching dollars for further funding. Our council priority is maintaining our welcoming small town. These REIT revenues go a long way towards being able to compete and be competitive for grant funding, because we can often say, yes, we have our matching funds available. You know, we can commit to those, which gains us, really gains us additional points in those competitive grant processes. Effective transportation and protection of natural resources. We leverage these funds to assist with grants for those projects. Distribution of resources, a focus on our long-range financial stability. Again, trying to leverage everything we can to get those additional grant dollars. A fiscally balanced mix of desired services and transparency in our policy and actions. This fund doesn't really have specific projects, rather similar to building reserves. As uses are approved and appropriated by council by budget action, they are transferred out to the to the appropriate capital funds. For the 2024, the 23-24 biennium, we're forecasting $1.6 million in revenue. That estimate is dependent on sales tax activity. So, you know, there is just caution coming into this biennium, just as we monitor what the real estate market, how it's reacting to the inflationary pressures. So we don't have a lot budgeted for the upcoming biennium. We have $250,000. This will assist with funding improvements at Siebenthaler Park, as well as $300,000 to support automating the irrigation out at our cemetery. A lot of that irrigation is still on a very manual process, so we are losing not only staff time, but we're losing efficiency. We're losing water efficiency. So we want to get that automated, and we'll just see the benefits of that in spades. Okay, so happy to answer any questions on the REIT fund before we move on to ARPA.
Councilmember Botetto.
So I noticed that the Bennett Park isn't included. Is that too far out as far as development?
That actually has park impact fees associated with that project.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And I believe there's also funding in parks to do additional to do some additional planning.
Cassandra, I just noticed at one point I saw $275,000 for the cemetery irrigation. Another place I saw $300,000 allocated. Is it one or the other, or?
I will double check on that for you and be happy to follow up on that.
Should be 3.
Should be.
Yeah.
Do you remember where you saw the 275
Oh, it would have been in this packet.
in that one?
No, it wasn't on, it was on, not on the little green, it's not on that. It's not on that one, Jason. It's on this one we get on our.
Okay. Well, it might be a
Okay.
typo. We apologize, but thank you, Councilmember Botetto, because on the preliminary budget, it does also list 275, but we'll get that corrected. 'Cause it is
Yeah.
3.
I'll take care of that. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Anybody online? All right. Go ahead.
Okay, 2 funds left. So in our special revenue classification, we have our ARPA fund. This is new. This was new for the 21-22 biennium. This was to account for the $2.9 million awarded from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. This was a federal response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have an established ARPA committee at City Council Subcommittee. It reviews staff recommendations and recommends use of funds. And then those recommended uses are authorized by budget amendments. We do have this in a separate fund because we know this will be audited very heavily, and that provides us the transparency and the tracking in order to really ensure that we are meeting kind of an elevated bar as far as audit requirements go. So our 23-24 goals is to complete our authorized projects. We'll continue our federal reporting. We report annually on the use of the funds, not only how much has been obligated, but how much has been spent, and then monitor our subrecipient grantees for compliance and reporting. Those subrecipients are for restaurant grants as well as tenant improvement grants. And if we successfully utilize the commissary kitchen funding that was authorized under the ARPA program.
All right.
So long-term goals, fully appropriate and use our award consistent with federal guidelines. We want to be sure that that we are taking advantage of every dollar that we have access to and implementing those council goals for the ARPA funds. Our council priorities, excellent government. We want to leverage those partnerships for enhanced services. And that's not only a partnership with the federal government for the funding, but our partnerships with our with the subgrantees and the various organizations that that council has awarded funding for. So carryover, these are all items that have already been funded. We'll be carrying them over into the 23-24 biennium for completion. So that's the utility project in our town center, homeless outreach and housing, business grants for our commissary kitchen, the parklet program that was just approved, wayfinding signs, that's a match between ARPA and our tourism fund, cybersecurity, as well as Portland Luz at Rainier View and Loyalty Park. I'm happy to answer any questions on our ARPA fund.
No, I think you're good to go. Thank you.
Okay, finally, our fiduciary fund. This is our firefighters pension fund, fund number 611. This is a statutory requirement. Firefighters hired prior to a date in 1970 get part of their retirement compensation, not only from the state, but from the city of Sumner. Anyone hired after that date for firefighter and law enforcement participate in the state of Washington's retirement system. We have 2 participants still in our program. And then the funding from this is from state shared revenues. There's a firefighter insurance premium tax that's distributed to the city from Washington state. That's about $25,000 annually. And then it's also supplemented with a transfer in from the general fund to make up the difference. So our goals is to continue to fulfill our obligation to our retired employees or spouses. We know that, at some point this fund will no longer be necessary, but we have obligations and we'll continue to meet those. So long-term goals is to ensure our fiscal responsibility in light of unexpected needs. And that really is one of the biggest question marks when it comes to this fund is we have obligations not only for pension, but for medical costs, including long-term care. If that were to come to be, we need to be sure that we have a way to meet those obligations. And then to close the fund when appropriate. Again, it's providing that service as long as it's necessary for our retiree and spouses. Council priorities, this meets our transparency and policy and actions. We have obligations. We want to be sure that we're meeting them. So we program those. Again, it has their program for management purpose in the firefighters pension fund. For accounting purposes, we report this as part of the general fund. So 2023-24, anticipating medical expenditures of about $10,000. That's really in line with trend analysis from historical data, along with retiree pension cost of $150,000 over the biennium. Again, this may change depending on the needs of our participants.
Any questions? No? Go ahead.
Okay. So coming up, some additional discussion tonight to revisit our strategic reserve, our city council funding, as well as other considerations. Coming up in future regular meetings, we have 2 biennial budget public hearings. Those are required by statute. I am hoping that we get some engagement with those. And then on December 5th, we will be coming to you with our ordinance adopting the 23-24 biennial budget.
Okay, so that wraps up our department presentations. The rest of tonight, we plan on focusing on property tax, council strategic reserve, as well as the short items that are left for consideration. As I mentioned to you last time we met, my hope tonight is that we can land on a firm property tax number so staff can prepare the resolution that will be before you for consideration on November 7th. Jeff, can you go next slide? In your packet was included this table here, which lists the property tax at different rates, the 1%, which we have historically taken as what's authorized under state law, unless we have bank capacity like we do. We're one of the few cities that still has this capacity left. In previous meetings, the The Finance Committee's recommendation, staff recommendation, and the mayor's recommendation was to levy the maximum 9.5% increase, but we know that there will be questions about what that looks like, so we wanted to provide this graph for you. What I want to focus your attention on is the bottom line. For the average single-family residence, the 1%, which we have historically taken, is an additional $1.96 per month. And if you were to levy the maximum, which is approximately 9.5%, there would be an increase of $5.07 per month for the average single-family residence. It's not cumulative, so it's $1.96 for the 1%, all the way up to $5.07 if it was the max. I also want to remind council that the North End businesses in our MIC, they account for 56% of our overall assessed valuation, which means that they are paying more than half of any property tax revenue increases that you see here. So this is really a time for council to discuss. We do have some slides in the packet to help you navigate this. Jeff, can you go to the next slide? And we can flip back and forth between these as you have your discussion. The graph on the left, or the table on the left, represents if you do a 1% increase over last year's collections, the general fund would receive $213,545. That includes the additional revenue from new construction and improvements. All these numbers do, all the way up to $574,000 if you levy the maximum amount. If you look at the table on the right, this is just to allow you to compare it from the change over 1%. So if you were to levy the full amount, the city would realize an extra $360,000. And like I said before, it's $3.11 between the 1% and the 9.5% rate. And these dollar amounts, like I said, include new construction and improvements. So this is really a time for council to discuss, and we're happy to answer any questions for you.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments? Jeff, can we put online so I can see the people online? Oh, there they are. Okay. Councilmember Reed.
Big surprise from me, but even the 1% is a stretch for me. It's the timing is terrible to go back to the residents for an extra 360,000. Even if that's mixed with business, it's still coming out of the Sumner economy. So I would not be in support of the higher amounts.
Councilmember Newman.
Yes, I think I'm making an assumption here, but I just want to be sure. These projections at these different rates do not include fully permitted projects that we, for instance, like know, or kind of like, does it include in the projections things like the Red Apple development that like we know, and basically other future development that we kind of know is in the works but may not have been fully permitted yet?
No, this only includes properties that are currently built and occupied.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cole.
This has it's been a real struggle for me to come to some kind of conclusion as to what I think. And I was fully in favor of the 9.5%, but in listening to the constituents reading their objections to this, and knowing that, yes, gas is a little higher, utility rates higher, food's a little higher, and I guess I'm reluctant to now move to the 9.5%. So I would be sort of advocating for maybe a 3% increase as opposed to 9.5%.
All right. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. Jason, do you know on rental properties, apartments particularly, how they handle that property tax bill? Do they add it to their rent? How does that work?
I think it's a little bit all over the board, but most people would say that it gets passed on to the person who is renting the unit.
And do we have any kind of restrictions on how much they can add to the rent? Do we control that at all?
No, we do not have rent control. I'm actually, look to the lawyer in the room, but I believe rent control is completely legal everywhere in the state of Washington. Yes, she's shaking her head, yes.
Okay.
There is some limited things. I know some cities have enacted local ordinances that, while they're not called rent control, they have restrictions on how often you can raise rent.
Okay. Okay. And then a couple other things. The comment you made about the North End businesses, could you restate that again? I want to make sure I heard you correctly.
So if you look at 100% of our assessed valuation, 56% of our assessed valuation is part of the MIC, our Manufacturing Industrial Center. So that means that for every dollar of property tax that we collect, 56 cents of it is coming from a North End property owner.
So it's not hitting my tax bill at all. It's coming from them.
Right, because it's, your tax bill for property taxes is assessed based on, your overall property valuation.
Sure.
Right? So you pay a rate per thousand. So obviously, larger industrial pieces of property have a higher value. Therefore, they're paying a significant property tax bill.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because that adds to my proposal. I don't want to call it an argument, but my thought about this is, first of all, the pie chart represents how much money the city of Sumner gets from all of our property tax bills, and it's 8%. And I'm not meaning to talk right to you, but
yeah,
you're the best looking person there. So.
I'm the only one at the table, sir.
So 8% of what we pay to Pierce County in the form of our property tax. The number is daunting, as Patrick mentioned. 360,000 plus goes to the general fund for the 9.5%. But that comes down to individually $3.11 a month for a year. That means that we're going to pay $37.32 more than we paid last year. Is that right, Cassandra?
It's slightly right. So it's $5.07 per month more. So it's 60.
Oh, change from 22.
Right. So the $3.11 is the difference between the 1% that council typically takes and the full levy amount.
Okay.
So another way to say what you just said is for an additional, $3.11, the city gets $360.
Okay, and that's in the 8% wedge of that pie.
Right. The 9.5%, that's a great point that I think was lost a little bit last week, is, as you mentioned, you have your full property tax bill. The city of Sumner only gets 8% of that whole bill. And if council was to increase property taxes by 9.5%, it's only 9.5% on that small 8% sliver, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really, if you think about if 8% is, 8% of 100, now you're going to raise that 8% by one, basically you're going up by 1% overall, the whole property tax bill, if you do the math out.
Okay. Thank you for adding to that. Then I just have one final comment in that besides my recommendation or what I'm in favor of. And all those words, I forgot what it was. Let's come back to that. I'm in favor of the 9.5%. Oh, I know what it was, 9.5%, because didn't we hear at some point that the inflation rate is 11, 12%? What is the current inflation rate?
So we look at a couple different inflationary rates, but if you look at the cost of living, which is what a lot of your labor contracts are based on, as well as just goods and supplies, in June, it was 10.1%. Right now, it's come down a little bit, hovering around 9%. But what we're also seeing is on the construction cost index, right? When that's the other piece that we watch, because that affects all of our general fund construction projects, like street projects. That is between 12 and 15% up from a year ago. When we talk about goods and services, I know that there's a gas tax that's coming in January. The city is subject to having to pay that gas tax too. We're not exempt from that. So as Mr. Steffens mentioned, we're spending, especially in the summer months, approximately $16,000 a month in fuel. Well, add another 50 cents per gallon onto that. And, it does compound for us too. So everything, well, I appreciate, council, that you're in a tough position. We're all feeling the pain at the pump and at the grocery store, but the city's feeling the pain when it comes to, buying fuel itself and fixing roads and everything. It all costs more. It's a tough decision.
Thank you for that additional comment. So I'm in favor of the 9.5% increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Hochstetter.
Yeah, I'll also state my support for the 9.5, and that is because when you hear the real explanation from our financial staff, you understand how this raise happens, and it's not 9% on your overall tax bill. And I feel like some of the things that have been put online to the citizens is leaving out a lot of details, and it's not really giving them the real information. It's just enough to excite them. The people that were here were really actually confused about what we were actually looking at doing. They were making a huge assumption. And when the committee came back, and the committee listened to it all in the finance committee, and they felt comfortable with it enough to pass it and bring it along to us. And that's when they were looking at the facts. But when you start doing this other thing where you leave out a lot of the real details, I'm kind of embarrassed that people would confuse the public like that. I don't think we should be misleading them. I think they should have all the facts, and they should understand what we're actually looking at. So there's an uncertain economic future coming. We don't want to have to start cutting services to our citizens, because when you start playing catch up, it just costs you more in the long run. So what we're trying to do is make it where we can just get enough to keep us rolling along in case there's major problems that will keep with it. This is not an excessive amount that we're lobbying. So I'm really hoping that the council will pass this and not just get swayed by letters that a lot of them sound all the same. They're all coming from the same source, and they're just not going from the true information or really knowing enough about the subject to understand what's happening here. So thank you.
All right. Councilmember Botetto.
So one thing, the reason why we are able to increase the tax up to 9.5% is because of bank capacity. So if we were to take a lower amount and then next year take the balance of that bank capacity, could we do that?
Absolutely. That's always an option. I want to make sure for the public that's listening, bank capacity does not mean that it's sitting over in another bank and accruing, year after year. It's just uncollected revenue. So you're always able to take a lower amount and access it later. The one thing I will just remind council of, property tax, we get it twice a year, right? So if we were to have a downturn next year and council wanted to access it, they wouldn't be able to do that until a year, and then it takes almost a year to collect that money. So pros and cons to both, but yeah, you can always collect less than the max.
Yeah. But I am in agreement with the others, Cindy and Earl, on the 9.5%, because some of the letters we got, they say don't raise our taxes, but by the way, we want you to make sure our roads are kept up and all these things. And, like as we learned this year about Jackson, Mississippi with their water, we're awfully lucky that we have a great water system, but it costs money to really provide those services. So I really believe that we need to keep at the highest level we can. So thank you.
Councilmember Brown, did you have anything? I was getting the people up here before I go back to them. Okay. Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. And to follow up to my previous comment is we're looking at a situation where families and especially seniors and low income don't have the ability to go back and ask for money, especially those that are on a fixed income. And then the city absolutely is in the same squeeze, in the same situation. But what the city is doing, in my opinion, is we're going back and asking and getting more money from the same people that don't have that same ability.
Councilmember Newman.
Thank you. I respect, all of the opinions that have been put out there and especially the factual corrections. That said, the timing is still seems very off for me. And I realized during my first comments when I simply asked questions that I didn't provide any clarification for staff on where I am. And I am, because of the timing, I am still more comfortable at 3% in trying to achieve some of our needs, but not adding to the burdens that everyone's facing right now.
Okay, and Councilmember Brown.
All right, thank you. I read letters with some council people that are not valid. I do. I listen to my neighbor. Our sales tax revenue is above expectations. Utility rates are already going up. Food, gas, heating oil. I had my heating oil filled up. Oh my gosh. I am not in favor of 9.5. I'm in favor of 0 or 3.0. Thank you.
You have it? Go ahead.
Yeah, everyone talks about seniors and the property tax. And there's a program that all people have to do if they're on a fixed income or in the elderly age group. They apply to the county and they get a break. I've done it and helped people do it. And I have done it for my own mother when she was alive. So I don't think we're going to be charging most of the elderly have that help available to them. And I think that to act like we're putting this burden on the back of the older people in town, I don't think it's fair. I think 56% of this burden is going on the businesses that are out in the MIC that are large and healthy businesses. Thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I like the idea of using more bank capacity next year if we need to. So maybe 3% now, and then who knows what.
Anybody else? What'd you get, Jason?
Oh, I got 3 at 9.5, 3 at 3%, and Mr. Reed, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you were 0 or 1.
1%, yeah.
So
But has anybody changed their mind since they first made their first impression?
I don't know. I have a path forward if unless somebody's changed their mind.
Anybody change your mind? What's your path
Okay,
forward?
so the path forward is staff will present it at 9.5 because that is what came out of the executive department as well as finance and personnel. At the same time, we will prepare a 3% amendment for somebody to make, and it'll have to be a vote that night. If the amendment passes at 3%, then you would vote as a whole at the 3% level.
Yes, you sure can.
Thank you. I want to thank Cassandra for all the work she's done on this, and Jason for keeping us on level ground and helping us understand. My one final comment is that through my experience in the public sector employment, when there's a reduction in revenue, there is also a companion reduction in expenditures. And as was pointed out, the 9.5% is in some cases slightly lower than the current inflation rate, and in other cases substantially lower. So what's going to happen here is if we vote on anything but something closer to the actual rate, we're paying our labor unions above that. I don't know the specific numbers, but the expenses for the city will not go down just because we don't have the right amount of revenue. We will end up not doing some of our services. And like, it could be sidewalks. It could be, we're not going to pave the road this year. We're not going to crack seal this part of town, whatever it is to help us make our ends meet. So I think prudence requires us to think, okay, pay me now or pay me later. If we don't do some of those services, things fall apart. And Jason's looking at his watch. I'm sorry.
No, it was my Ring doorbell going off. So
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
The
I
tax
just,
man
I would
collecting.
call for whether we decide tonight or when it's voted upon, for the council to represent the public and deep down inside, what's it going to look like when we cut services? Because we will have to cut services if we can't afford the costs ourselves. I'm a senior citizen. I've been retired 11 years. I've been on a fixed income for that long, and I'm I'd be happy to pay $37 a year more so the city could do its job. Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody online? All right.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Next up is the Council Strategic Reserve. I'm going to turn it over to Cassandra to introduce this topic.
Okay, so the City Council Strategic Reserve, we talked about it a little bit earlier in the meeting. These are funds that this program first began with council action in fall of 2017 to begin with tax year 2018. So it was part of the overall property tax discussion that we were having in 2017. This is something that's reauthorized annually with the ad valorem property tax resolution. So one of my asks is, does council wish me to continue including this in our resolution for tax year 2023? So these funds accrue until they're allocated through the budget or a budget amendment process. We began in tax year 2018 with a little over $350,000. We accrued an additional $350,000 per year through the property tax resolution through 2021. In 2021, as part of the budget amendment process, City Council allocated $1 million for the Town Center Woo-Nerf project. If you think back, this was actually initially allocated to Wood and Main to complete that construction. As we were approaching that project, Wood and Main was the recipient of some additional grant funding through federal grants. And so we came back to City Council and said, we have this grant funding that can help with Wood and Main. We might have to come back, but right now, really, it's the most efficient use of the council strategic funds to reallocate these over to the Town Center Wuno project, and council made that adjustment. Additional for tax year 2022 accrued $350,000. So at the end of 2022, really the earmarked funds total $754,381,000. That's what's unallocated at the end of 2022. And then looking forward, if council direction is to include this in our property tax resolution that'll come before you on November 7th, we would add $350,000 in 2023. And then we'll have the same question for you at the end of 2023 for tax year 2024. I think that this program has worked exactly like we've intended it to work. So it's been exciting to see this kind of a program. I haven't seen this in other cities. And so I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comment regarding this program.
Anybody have a question or comment? Deputy Mayors.
Yeah, I'm in favor of us continuing to put the 350,000 in. It gives the council a chance to let it accumulate so it's large enough that we can make a capital improvement that really does something for the city. And we've been able to use it wisely before. And it also, I guess I'm not positive of this, but it sometimes looks good for us to have money that we can use as a match when we're looking for to fund a large project. And I like the idea of us having something like this set aside that we can use for that purpose too. So the fact that it has worked so well and it has given the council the ability to make the decision on it when something really wonderful comes up I'm still in favor of it. Thank you.
Councilmember Newman.
Thank you. I was not here at the creation of this, but think it was really smart, and I've been really happy about how we've used it so far. And I think it's already paid off in the way that we were able to get other grants and funds for a project. We leveraged them and got outside funding for things like Main and Wood that normally would not have been a project big enough to receive usually, like typically state or federal funding. So I think we've already shown that this program is pretty successful. I have now kind of a side thing because I'm not sure. I used to think I sort of have a request of council and I need staff guidance if council agrees, like how we go about doing it. And at first I thought it would be from this fund, but now I think that may not be correct. And that is in the future, this is now I'm going to skip ahead and talk about refer to conferences. The staff and the mayor have separate funding available for education and for staying up to date on skills. And because this was council reserve, I was thinking for council members, say if we wanted to go to Association of Washington Cities or the National League of Cities conferences, there really isn't money in the budget anywhere for us to be able to do that. And a lot of those sessions really do help us keep up on ongoing topics and decisions that all small cities have to make. And so I was wondering if this is an appropriate place for just $5,000 to $10,000 to be set aside for things like that, if council members are interested in ever attending those, or if that needs to come from somewhere else.
So we do have some limited funds in your legislative budget for local conferences like AWC, the budget conference that AWC puts on, their state conference that they put on. What we lack is if you want to go to anything nationally, like NLC, those conferences are considerably more expensive because of travel that we do not have funds for. There's two ways you could handle this. Yes, you could take some of the strategic fund, or if we're only talking $5,000 to $10,000, we can just take it out of the general fund at that dollar amount. But it's not, like you said, Councilmember Newman, it's limited what's in the budget currently. And
Okay.
Cassandra can probably tell you the exact amount here if we give her a minute.
And for next year, I mean, the good news is NLC will be in Tacoma, but or at least one of them will be. One might be somewhere else, but and I'm not talking about like excessively attending them, but some of them are good. And I know before I was sick, when I was interested in attending one of the NLCs this year, I was told that there wasn't any money, but possibly $2,500 could be found. And so that's why, which you're right, if it's a travel one between the hotels and airfare alone, like consumes quite a bit of that. And that's just for one member. So if 2 or 3 were ever interested in going in 1 year, although I'm not suggesting 3 for the same conference for quorum issues, but.
Sure. Cassandra?
Councilmember Newman, there's for the 23-24 biennium, there's 5,800 budgeted to cover travel and training registrations.
Okay, and I think it would be smart just to actually potentially double that in case of travel for just 1 or 2 members for upcoming national ones.
All right. Is that it?
For me.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also in favor of keeping the fund continuing as is. It has been very successful, as stated before. And I think one of the best examples of that is Wood in Maine. And at the time before we had the grant money that did come in, it allowed us to move forward because the matching was available through the strategic fund. So I'm definitely in support of maintaining it.
Councilmember Cole.
I just wanted to say that I am also in favor of the reauthorization for the $350,000 annually. I think it really came in handy with this WUNA project, and I can see that it could be helpful in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody? Councilmember Stewart.
Yes, just want to say I'm in favor of maintaining it as it's currently in place. Thank you.
Councilmember Potato.
I am also in agreement.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes, I appreciate it.
You're done? All right. And Councilmember Reed, did you just forget to take your hand down again?
I did.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so we will include that in the resolution for the property tax to include that strategic reserve. As I've said before, I really believe that this is one of the most visionary things this council has ever done. As Cassandra mentioned, I don't know another city that is doing this, and it's really helped us leverage other funds to accelerate projects. It's like pouring gasoline on these things, and it's just amazing. So very exciting. Thank you very much. Next slide, Jeff. So the last thing on our agenda tonight is to talk about the items that did not make it into the budget. And this is by no means a full list of those items that did not make it into the budget that were cut by the executive department. However, these are the short list that either council has said that they want to look at further, or that the executive department said that warrant some future considerations. The timing of this discussion is probably a little off, being that we don't have a clear path forward on property tax. And I say that because the budget as presented is balanced right now. If you were to fund these items, especially any of the larger items, the budget would no longer be balanced. So really, to fund these, you need to find the revenue somewhere in the budget. And that could be through your council strategic reserve fund. It could be through new property tax revenue or by making other changes in the budget. And when we go through these, I just want to point out what you're looking at. So I'm going to go to the MIC transit line, for example. What was requested and included in the budget was 165,000. As you can see, there's a request column filled in as well as the funded column filled in. That is an example of something that you could change the allocation on to free up some cash if you so choose. As you may recall, Deputy Mayor Hochstetter proposed to table that item a few weeks ago, and it's currently sitting on the table for future consideration. Because council wanted to have have a discussion in light of everything that's unfunded in the budget. The other thing I wanted to point out, you get down to something like sidewalk repairs. Public Works requested 500,000. The executive department funded 200 of it, so there's a delta there of 300,000. Same with community partners. The executive department recommended $200,000 in funding. That's what's in the budget, but we had $275,000 worth of asks. Going back to Councilmember Newman's last statement about doubling the legislative travel and training budget, this would be an appropriate thing to add to this list for council to discuss. I'm happy to facilitate a discussion on this tonight, but it may be more appropriate that we delay this conversation until after the property tax rate is set, which would mean that we'd hold a special study session on November 7th after you set the rate. We could then tell you what the dollar is that you could allocate for any of these projects. If council wants to allocate and fund any of them, really, that's a council policy decision.
Councilmember Tedder.
Could you tell me what the community partners is?
Sure. This is actually something we started on
the like family center.
Right. So one of the first budget meetings, council went through and allocated that to a number of community partners, but you only had 200 and you had 275 worth of asks. So it's that delta that we're talking.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. So my question would be on some of these items, is there a way to, I know you can't encumber them necessarily, but our sales tax projections, so for one, we had a huge surplus for 2022. We're looking healthy going into 2023 with the potential for another big surplus because we have a couple of businesses expected to come online that aren't accounted for in the budget. Is there a way that as we incrementally reach surplus amounts, that then gets tied back to some of these unfunded items and kind of a pay-as-you-go type scenario?
So there's a few ways to look at it. First, I want to clarify, we are collecting more sales tax revenue than what we had budgeted for. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a surplus, right? There's, it falls to fund balance for future council allocation. It also speaks to the financial policies of the city and making sure that we have a healthy operational reserve. It's what we started talking about at the very beginning of this meeting. We also have had some preliminary conversations with council that we know that we have additional expenses related to the town center remediation project that we've discussed the last two meetings coming up, and any sort of surplus or not surplus, sales tax excess. I screwed that one up, didn't I? Any sort of excess revenue from sales tax would be a logical source, funding source to help with that remediation project.
Okay, so that's anticipating that there might be those. Can we find an acronym for it instead of a surplus? Yeah, but no, it's so that's already being discussed as a potential funding source for the remediation.
Correct. And really, you have limited funding sources for the remediation. You have your strategic reserve, that we've just talked about. You have any sort of excess revenue over your projections, which is the sales tax, or you'd be looking at fund balance in the general fund, other general fund dollars cut from somewhere else. Those are the primary sources of revenue for that. Obviously, you could do an interfund loan, but then you'd just be paying back to utilities with interest.
Yeah.
So it's very limited options for that cleanup.
So, and that's why it's so hard to when you're confident there's going to be a surplus, but you can't guarantee it. For example, with one of the recently onboarded retail companies that's has the potential to generate a lot that's not currently accounted for, and then a second one that's supposed to come online next year that's also not accounted for. I wish there was a more, and I guess that falls into the same category, more of a pay as you go as those funds are realized through economic development, that then they come back to council and say, hey, we would like to move forward with X, Y, or Z. The funds are there to support it, that type of thing. But I understand the complexity to it.
Yeah, and Councilmember Reed, to your point, one option, because we don't know the full financial picture, is council always has the ability to amend the budget. So if there's a particular item on here that council is interested in, but is unsure of revenue streams or revenue sources, it could be something that we bring back after we have we close out 2022 and know what sort of excess revenue there are. We'll also have a better understanding of the remediation costs, right? And, you could always revisit and reallocate money to any of these programs at a future date.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Stewart.
Thank you. Just looking at this table, I appreciate the numbers, and I have a question before I make further comment. The 200,000 for sidewalk repairs, that's been put in the budget, is that correct?
That's correct.
As also the community properties, and I thought we settled down to the 200,000. It's no longer 275, is that right?
Right. What 200 was always the number in the budget. But if you recall, at the end of that meeting, there was some council desire to try what would it take to fully fund them. That's why it's still on this
Oh, I
list.
see, okay. Well, I'll just throw my thoughts out. I think what Councilmember Reed was talking about is probably makes a lot of sense. Wait and see where we are at the end of the year. I really do not want to fund the MIC Transit because we have so many more places for funding to benefit our citizens. So I would suggest not doing that and using $100,000 of that for the park CCTV, because to me, that's a security issue to take care of our parks. And I'm really worried about the watershed security fencing. We need to find some funding for that. I mean, we're so lucky that we've dodged any kind of bullets towards vandalism in that area. So those are the 2 or 3 things that I feel very serious about, and if necessary, even for the street overlay, dipping into the council strategic reserve so we can fund that, because some of our roads are woefully in bad shape. Thank you.
Anybody else? Deputy Mayor Hochstetter.
Well, Mr. Wilson, did you want to hear some opinions on this now? I know we don't know the exact dollar amounts, but.
I'm happy to listen to your opinions.
Okay, well, I wasn't prepared to take money from other funds or anything. I figured that was a full council decision, but I was thinking that I wanted to use the MIC Transit money and move it down to the street overlay program and began an asphalting fund that we can start adding to every year. And we may need to add to that or start it now and add to it as we go, but that was one of my very top priorities. Thank you.
Anybody else down here? No? Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. And to Mr. Stewart's comment on the street overlay program and the use of strategic funds, I'm actually also in support of that. And two of the biggest things that we always hear, and I'm sure every city hears, is streets and sidewalks. And that is definitely, I think, an appropriate use of at least some of the strategic funds.
Anybody else? All right.
I think that gives staff some areas that we need to focus on to bring back to you as part of a special study session on November 7th, after we identify any other revenue from property tax. Just to remind you, the current budget being balanced it assumes a 1% lift on property tax. So anything over the 1% would be new revenue that council could allocate.
Oh, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, I would be in favor of funding the MIC transit for maybe 1 year to see how it goes. And so that would be half of that, I believe.
That's actually the 1 year dollar amount.
That's 1 year.
Mhm.
All right, I still would like to see what happens.
At the November 7th meeting, we'll also give you an update because obviously that's been continuing to percolate in the background. And Ryan will have an update that he can share with you about business interest and some really promising numbers for that program. So that'll help facilitate that discussion.
All right.
I guess as a comment to that, as we see the MIC gives us 56% of our income, and we need to be good. I mean, everybody is very concerned about the downtown neighbors, the core, but that is also part of Sumner. And so I really think that I'm really excited to hear that there's movement and that, it might be something that's going to be workable because, they're helping to pay. I'm not having to pay $10 for my property tax or whatever. And so, the MIC is an important factor of our city. So.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody online? No. All right. Are we good?
That's all we have for tonight.
Okay. Seeing no more questions, and I would say we are adjourned at 7:48.